Hello and welcome in for yet another edition of the Electric Election Road Trip and Podcast. I'm your executive producer, Saul Spady. Alongside me is Benjamin Becker, the executive director of the Conservation Coalition. And we are really honored to be in the company of first this Orion assembly plant for GM and the electric cars that are right next to us, one that we're going to get soon, as well as Dane Parker. You are the Chief Sustainability Officer for GM. Welcome us in. Let our listeners know exactly where we are.
Yeah, we're here in Southeast Michigan, like you said, in the Orion Assembly Plant, sitting next to several Bolt EVs. So pretty excited that get to be here with you.
Well, and this is almost the one we're getting. It's a little bit more orange. I think we're getting the Cajun red, and we're going to drive it around for about a week. And what was fascinating to learn about as we were preparing to come here to this incredible facility is that your goal is to be as electric as possible, as quick as possible as a company, and to really have electric vehicles be the future of your company. That is something that I think a lot of people wouldn't assume for GM. Can you talk a little bit about why you guys have decided to go in that path and why that's so important to you?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, we set a vision a couple of years ago of a future with zero emissions. And an important part of that is vehicles and electric vehicles. And so as a company, we were a part of the transportation revolution in the early 1900s, when we went from horses to horseless carriages and to cars as we know them. And at that time, combustion engines won the competition for practicality and affordability. And although there were battery vehicles then and there were steam-powered vehicles, combustion engines made sense. And so for the last 100 years, we've been leading in that. And as we look forward, we see an electric future, and we see it, from an environmental standpoint, that in terms of doing what we need to do to protect the planet and protect the future, this is an important way we contribute. But we also see from a customer experience perspective that we can provide a product that we think will convince you as a customer that you want to be an electric vehicle anyway. And so it can be a win-win.
Well, what's fascinating about your really first flagship electric vehicle with the Chevy Bolt is that you've entered the market for consumers that might not be able to afford other electric vehicles. That's been one of the biggest sticking points that people have had against getting electric vehicles, is that it's a rich person's car. Can you talk a little bit about why you think this is part of the future of electric vehicles, and why electric vehicles can also be a vehicle for the common man?
Yeah, and to be effective, they have to be. When you look at the numbers, it can't be something that only a few people can afford because they can feel good about themselves as, having it as their second or third vehicle. EVs need to be something anyone can use as their primary mode of transportation. And so when we released this in 2018, that's one of the things we said is this is the first long-range, affordable electric vehicle for everybody. And for us, that was the reason we started. It was because scale matters.
So for us on this journey, learning is one of the most important parts. We're not coming here to tell you what to do. We're traveling around the United States to learn from everyone, be it wind power, solar panels, farming science. What would you hope for the people watching, or maybe even an elected official out there who stumbles across this? What do you want them to learn a little bit more about electric vehicles, and more specifically what GM and you are doing?
We'd like them to know that we're going to have an electric vehicle for everybody, that electric vehicles need to be for everybody, and that this can be something besides what we can do as a company. We need their help in advocating for policies and legislation that makes it easier to own an electric vehicle, that helps consumers want to be an electric vehicle. And so I think the more they can learn and the more they can experience, the more support they'll want to give to that future.
Well, and I think, as we've seen on this road trip, American ingenuity and innovation is at the core of kind of how we can fix these problems. GM has constantly innovated from numerous decades of kind of being ahead of the curve in a lot of ways. And now you've turned, I think the most fun story is you're turning a Hummer, which is the stereotypical gas guzzler, climate change killing machine, into an electric vehicle. And you're doing that because that's what consumers are demanding, and it's the right thing to do, and it's an incredible opportunity to see how the market shifts things forward really quickly.
Well, and it's an incredible story of American manufacturing, even more so, because this is like, I'm geeking out. We've been in some cool manufacturing places, but I've never seen anything this big, and this is going to turn around more electric vehicles than almost anywhere in the United States, and so just kind of adding to that and sharing that would really mean a lot.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that, this used to be a facility that was for internal combustion engines, and your goal, and you're almost there, is to make this in a 100% electric vehicle facility. How is this happening across GM's kind of entire operations, and where else is this happening outside of Orion?
Yeah, so a great example is not far down the street here in Detroit Hamtramck. We're converting a plant that we had there to build the new Hummer EV and some future electric vehicles that will come there, and the entire plant's being reinvested, retooled, and set up to produce electric vehicles. And so as we grow the volume, that's exactly our goal, is we'll go plant by plant and increasing the volume of electric vehicles and eventually converting our footprint to be all electric.
So there was a presidential debate recently. We'll place it in time. I don't want to say anything kind of on the politics, but there was an interesting statement by one of the candidates saying that they wanted to push for electric vehicles by 2035. And I've got you in the hot seat right now. I am super into electric vehicles. We're driving a Tesla around the country. We're about to get this Bolt EV and drive that as well. We are in it to win it when it comes to electric. But I was a little worried about the concept of FEMA vehicles responding to a natural disaster. Can you speak to a little about how GM is actually going to create a situation where we can feel really safe, both helping the environment, but also protecting our citizens who need to get out of a serious situation as fast as possible, as safely as possible?
Sure. Yeah, gets to that point of ingenuity and creativity, because there is a fear with electric vehicles of being stranded if you run out of gas, and in quotes, what do you do, right? And today you get towed and you have to go somewhere where there's a charger. But we're working on, we make hydrogen fuel cells, and have been doing that for a while in a partnership with Honda, and we're working on a hydrogen fuel cell charger, so that you get hydrogen, you get a fuel cell on a mobile platform, and you can bring power to wherever power needs to be, and you can bring a lot of power very quickly to a lot of places. And if you happen to own an EV in your home and you lose power, the technology is there that can enable you to actually power your home from your vehicle. So you could have 2 or 3 days worth of home energy stored in your vehicle to help get you through some of those disasters.
Well, I think the beauty of this kind of building for a greener future with electric vehicles is that not everything is going to be figured out overnight. I mean, if you would have said that you could have an electric vehicle for $30,000 that could charge for 260 miles a few years ago, people would have thought that was not unreal and unrealistic. So what you're talking about with this innovation to potentially kind of help out with electric vehicles being very helpful in disasters seems far off, but it probably isn't that far off, because a company like GM is dedicating the time and the energy and the effort to build that technology for the future. And I think that's what's so special about having a GM be so involved in this process. But there are a lot of other companies that are working on electric vehicles right now. And I think what a question a lot of people are going to ask is why GM? Why is GM going to be at the forefront of this? I think we've seen it firsthand, but I'd love to kind of hear from you, why GM?
Yeah, I think we'd say it's ours to own, in the sense that, today in the United States, we sell more vehicles than anybody else. And we don't see a future where we'd want that to change. And so we think we're the best position to lead into that future and to lean in that future. And as you're seeing here, we have several more plants just like this that are already in place right now. And so we can bring a scale to this that can very, very quickly move the needle. And so we feel like it's our opportunity, and in some ways, it's ours to lose, and we don't want to lose.
Speaking of that scale, speaking of kind of one of our favorite words on this trip, which is big, hairy, audacious goal, Benji already kind of touched on it. Yeah, fine. It's one of my favorite words, this big, hairy, audacious goal. There's nothing bigger than 100% electric. What was it like in that meeting where you decided we're going to make that statement? Because people talk all the time about, if you want to see our values, let us see your budget, right? Let's see your books and see how you're actually putting it there. There's no greater commitment than that 100%. What was that like?
Actually, our CEO, Mary Barra, has been passionate about this for a while. And I think when she began talking about a zero emissions future, people asked that question, are you sure? What do you mean? Well, when we talked about that we're spending $20 billion in these 5 years, between 20 and 25, actually doing it. And when people inside the company saw the shift in engineering resources, when they began to see the products, it became real. And we are doing it. And I think that's one of the exciting things to be a part of, is actually see a vision turning into products and reality as quickly as it is. And we're going to amaze a lot of people with what they see in the next few years from General Motors.
That connects for me and what you're doing with the Conservation Coalition, Benji. I mean, you started this organization, as I've said many times, 4 years ago because you saw conservatives weren't putting their pedal to the metal on climate change. You had a vision, you had a dream, you said it, and then we're sitting here talking about the Chevy Bolt EV that we're going to get 4 years later to keep you telling that story. Where do you think that connects, and where do you kind of find inspiration from this story with what you're doing with the conservation?
Well, I think that's a great point. There's a couple parallels that I think really even came up on the tour. The first was when you were talking about this transition to electric vehicles, every team member that was on the floor that we met talked about how this was a team effort, and that their viewpoint was heard, and that their value as a staff member here was heard in these processes, and that actually the people on the floor helped make the decision for how to put the electric battery into the car, which is, a very technical thing, but it's a very important thing because you need to have the battery to run the car. So I think it's kind of this mentality that, from the top to the bottom, not just within a facility, but within society, we can all be kind of collaborating with each other and hearing each other out. And so, we're visiting, one of the biggest companies in the country, GM, but we've also visited some incredibly, small startup companies as well. And they all have a very similar mentality that working, across differences, across geographical boundaries, across kind of the different problems that exist in each industry is kind of how to move forward. And that's been this approach that we've taken at the Conservation Coalition, is that you need conservatives and liberals. You need, the transportation industry. You need everyone to be at the table to fight these challenges, and you need a community. And it seems like, we're building a community on our end of members across the country who feel passionately about these things through a more innovation-based perspective. And you've built a community of people here who are just thrilled to be working on electric vehicles. And we talked to young people here that felt that way, and older people here that felt that way. And that's the power of this.
Yeah, so for us, for our history, our communities have mattered a lot to us. And whether it's the community within a manufacturing plant or the broader area in which we live, it's been something that's been important to GM throughout their history. And so for us, sustainability has to involve them. It's not sustainable. A future with no jobs isn't a future. And ultimately, the environment is really about people. The planet would live just fine without us, but we want to be here and we want to be able to thrive. And so it's part of our DNA. The way we work is a community, and we see sustainability as a team sport within the company, and even broader, as you mentioned, Benji, across industries, across political lines, across policy lines. It has to be something we do together, because we need to protect that future that we all want to enjoy.
I see the connection, and it just comes up so much. We're looking for this global revolution, but it has to be enacted locally, and you have to have people invested at a local level. When you think about what you're doing at GM, you're one of the biggest companies in the world, but you've created that energy here at Orion. Where and how can other companies start to take that and bring it into maybe their smaller footprint? Because it should be easy, right? If you can do it here, you can do it anywhere on Earth.
And just to add a little caveat onto that as well is, how can companies that have an impact on the environment, like GM, be a part of the change and have that culture be a part of the change?
For me, I think there's two really critical factors. You need to tell people why you're doing what you're doing. They need to understand that, because then they can sign up for it. And you need to give them the information that you have on on the impact that you make. And so as a company, when we talk about the impact our vehicles have on, let's say, our CO2 footprint, we disclose our CO2 footprint publicly. Employees can see that, and they can see then us saying we want to be a part of the change, we want to lead the improvement. Then they can feel a sense of pride in being a part of a better future and in solving some things that weren't solved before. And so I think if you tell people why you're doing what you're doing and give them the information, help educate them, give them an awareness of the impact it has, they can get excited just like you're excited.
And I think that message to young people specifically is really important, that, you know, it's a complex issue, but there are solutions that can happen within all industries. And I think my message to young people from just learning about this is, these are the projects that are going to change the course of history. These are the projects that are going to help solve climate change. GM is open about its environmental impact, and it's doing everything it can to help fight those challenges head on. And there's no secrets. It's just, you know, you guys are out there doing the work. And that's what young people should be excited about, is being a part of that actual change here on the ground in an industry that makes a large impact and can make a large impact in a positive way pretty quickly.
I'd almost ask that in a career perspective, because it's always good to see people protesting for what they believe in and doing it in a good way and getting out there for climate action and trying to get the message of global warming out there. But as we get older, I always feel like, and this is part of, you know, the sophistication of life, you know, you have to move from, you know, sometimes protest to taking action. How would you encourage people who want to get involved in renewable energy careers, get involved in electric manufacturing, to kind of take their energy that maybe was on the streets doing, you know, where you started, Benji, kind of, you know, protesting at school and you know, leaving class to get that message out? Where would you say, how can we transition that to actually making the change happen?
Yeah, for us, one of the great things, we get to see a lot of young engineers come in, and many of them have joined the company because they want to be a part of creating this future, and they realize that whether it's renewable energy, or in our case, we have a goal that half the content in our vehicles by 2030 will be sustainable, will be part of a circular economy. You know, we have zero waste goals. So what we need is innovation and creativity to solve the problems that exist today. How do you get resins that you can reuse over and over again? How do you solve safety challenges with different materials? And so to me, it's a great opportunity for someone to be a chemist, an engineer, a scientist in some way, so they can bring their knowledge and their passion to actually help us change the way we work.
And that innovation that you are speaking of that you need is something that young people can have a large part in. And I would assume that GM would call any and all young people who want to be a part of this change to be with GM and on the same team to make this happen. Yeah, go ahead.
We're doing it real time. I mean, if you look out at the postings we have, I saw one today, we're asking people to come be a part of a zero emissions future. Come bring your creativity, because the opportunity for young people is there isn't a way it's always been done. So we're, as a company, saying we've got to go do things different, which means by definition, we don't know how to do it right now. So, you know, you can be 25 years old and know just as much as someone who's been at it for 30 years, because neither of us knows how to do it yet. So bring your passion and let's do it.
The challenge is so big, we all have to be lifelong learners. No matter what age we are, we all need to be engaged. I always need to be engaged on the time. We've got about 5 minutes left here. I want to shift the topic to something a little different. I read this crazy article about how, you know, this little company called GM is destroying every single Chinese electric car maker by making kind of a little electric car. Can you speak to the concept that global warming, climate change, it's a global issue, and how GM is working on it on a global level? Because people always say we need to be working in China, we need to be working in India. Well, GM's doing that.
Yeah, we love that. In fact, we sell more vehicles in China than we do in the United States. And for us, it's been an important market for a long time. And as you mentioned, global warming is a global problem. So for us to solve it in the United States doesn't really solve it. And in fact, the Chinese government has been incredibly supportive of accelerating progress in this area. And when we looked at the Chinese customers, they typically don't drive as far. They don't have the resources to buy a $100,000 vehicle. And so it's one of the best-selling vehicles in China right now. You mentioned it's under $5,000, a little electric vehicle, and it's been huge. And that's a big part of the solution.
Well, and to that point, I mean, it's great to be working overseas on this issue. Have there been barriers to succeeding like that in the United States that we need to be aware of in terms of how the United States can be better in, you know, you said you sell more electric vehicles in China. You have a bigger market in China right now. What have been the barriers in the United States that have allowed us to lag behind a little bit?
Well, you know, there are cultural differences in every country. In the United States, we tend to be fairly independent. and we don't like to be told what to do. And so we will resist things until it's in our interests to be different. And so the challenge here is what you're doing is trying to help everybody see it's in our interests to be different. The Chinese government has been very direct about saying, we really want this to happen, and we're going to do some things that incent you to want it with us, and those are very effective there. And so, there's policy things that I think we could learn from in the United States that they've done that really have sped up the adoption of EVs.
Sure, and just a follow-up question on that too is, I was reading an article recently about how in China specifically, like the electric vehicle batteries are oftentimes powered by coal, as more so than they are here. When GM's looking at expanding its electric vehicle operations in China, how do you plan on combating that fact, and do you have plans to combat that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a very important point, which is a zero emissions future requires both electric vehicles and green energy. And so we have a goal as a company to have 100% of our energy be renewable energy by 2040 and by 2030 in the US. And so we put a lot of effort into a greener grid and working with the utilities, and they vary by country and by area, by region, so that we're bringing the grid along with the vehicles so that you end up with both.
Well, just one final note on that, and I know we're running out of time, Saul, but I think that speaks to the problem that the United States has, in that we're allowing other countries to start taking leaps and bounds ahead of us, even the ones that are polluting the most. And we're not making it as accessible here in the United States or as much of a priority. And that's the power and the need for this road trip, is that it needs to be obvious that these sorts of solutions are in our best interests, and we can't continue to fall behind the curve.
Yeah, this facility you're in right now is about half powered by renewable energy today. We've already signed an agreement with our utility provider. We're building a new solar plant, and it will be 100% renewable by 2023.
Well, I'm so excited for everything that you're doing here. I'm actually excited for the big announcement that you have coming on the Hummer EV. I've heard that you're going to be on a panel actually with Lucas Joppa, he's already come and met with us and had this conversation. And something that I just want to say to you, Benji, and really say as well to you, Dane, is that we need to keep connecting. It can't just be the teams that you're building here at GM. We need to connect you with Microsoft and make sure you're kind of enacting these global changes in partnership. We need to connect you with the Conservation Coalition. And as we close out, I guess, what is your words of wisdom for us? We're going on a bit of an odyssey around the country. This is an inspiring place. We're hoping to find the thread that will connect a more inspiring American renewable energy future. What are you hoping we find?
Exactly what you are finding. People that care, people that want to be a part of that, people that are engaged, people that see what you're doing and agree with where you're headed, and you're doing it in a way that's positive and constructive. And I think I would cheer you on. Keep going, because you're going to be in a really important voice that we need to hear at this time in this country.
Well, we're going to be an important voice, and I agree with that. So is GM, and I think we're going to spend the next 7 days in a Chevy Bolt figuring that out again, as we found out during the first few weeks of this trip. I can't wait to be inspired not only by the stories we find in the next week, but also by the vehicle that we're going to be driving, which is going to be coming from this incredible facility here in Orion, Michigan. I want to thank you for what you're doing, because it goes maybe against the grain of what people often think of as how we can move forward on sustainability, and it's all about American ingenuity and American innovation, and I'm just honored to be here.
It means so much. With that, we're honored that you're listening, you're following around, and you're part of this adventure. It's the Electric Election Podcast. I'll see you at our next stop.